warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Let me introduce myself. My name is Aeni.P. My NPM is 1906006. I am from Universitas Riau, Kepulauan, semester 6. So, in this video, I will fulfill the translation assignment. Check this out. Now, I will explain about what is translation, what is interpretation, and what are the differences of translation and interpretation. The first is, what is translation? According to Oxford Learners Dictionary, translation is to translate is to put something written or spoken into different language, cause something to be changed into a different form, words into action. There are some definitions of translation by experts. The first is, according to J.C. Cuthbert, 1965, translation as the replacement of textual material in one language or source language by equivalent textual material in another language, target language. The second is, according to Nida and Tabor, 1974, translation is a rewriting of the message contained in the source language into the target language, find similarities. Third is, according to Will Innos, 1982, translation is a transfer process which aims at the transformation of a written source text into an optimally equivalent translation text, and which requires the synthetic, the semantic, and pragmatic understanding and analytical processing of the source language. So, the conclusion is, translation is the process of transferring message from source language into target language. It involves taking a written text such as a book or an article and translating it in writing into the target language. So, the key is, translation is the transference of written information from the source language to target language. Next is, let's talk about what is interpretation. There are some definition of interpreting by experts. The first is, according to Gentile, Azolins, and Vasilakakos, 1996, interpreting is the oral transfer of message between speakers of different languages. The second is, according to Weber, 1984, interpretation is the oral transposition of an orally delivered message performed in the presence of the participants. And then the third is, according to Pochker, 2004, page 11, interpreting is a form of translation in which a first and final edition in another language is produced on the basis of a one-time presentation of an utterance in a source language. The conclusion is, an interpretation is the transfer of oral or signed information from the source language to target language. So, interpreter is a person who converts oral message from one language to another and vice versa. From the definition of translation and interpretation, so, translation is written. It involves taking a written text such as a book or an article and translating it in writing into the target language. So, interpreting is oral. It refers to listening to something spoken, speech or phone conversation, and interpreting is orally into the target language. Both translator and interpreters work as an intermediary between two languages. Translators and interpreters convert words from a source language to a target language. In short, they bridge the language gap between people in two different countries and cultures. Not everyone can become a translator and interpreter. Translation and interpretation require long training, practice, and experience. Owning suitable working skill and deep knowledge of languages and cultures, along with linguistic qualification and certificates, is indispensable to both translator and interpreter. In what ways are translation and interpretation different? Many people get confused between translation and interpretation. or more accurately, they refer to both interpretation and translation as translation. Ask 10 random people you know about the differences between translators and interpreters. I'm sure 7 or 8 out of them would say there aren't any differences. To the general public, translators and interpreters are just two distinct terms for people working on translating languages. In fact, this belief is not completely wrong but not a 100 right either. Most people know that translation involves retaining the original meaning of the source text and not a literal translation. The words used are often different, but they convey the same meaning. Surprisingly, people think of interpretation as a word-for-word translation, but that is not the case. An interpretation is often the purpose version of the original message. The goal of translation and interpretation is communication across languages and cultures. They can be seen as two sides of the same coin. There are also differences between the roles of translators and interpreters, although they share the same goal. People have enough reason for doing so, given that these days, mostly the same professional and companies provide both of these services. Anyway, even if they are similar, these two terms are not the same. Today, we are going to explain in the easiest word the differences between translation and interpretation. Let us explore the differences between the two sets of professionals. And then, what are the differences of translation and interpretation? The differences between translators and interpreters. The first is the skills required. Translators work with written documents daily, so there's no doubt that they need good writing skills. Because in the end, smooth, accurate, and error-free documents are the aim of translations. The meaning of written content may vary regarding different contexts, thus it's a must for translators to read and research reference materials to support the translating process. A great listening skills along with the ability to use CAT tools help translators complete the project quicker and remain high quality. On the other hand, interpreters listen to the speaker and translate the message simultaneously on the spot. It requires excellent listening and public speaking abilities. More than that, since having to translate almost immediately, interpreters also need quick decision-making skill to resolve unexpected situations. Unlike translators who take help from dictionaries or information on the internet, interpreters need to rely on his or her own knowledge and experience. Therefore, improving self-knowledge and skill is essential. Second is the level of accuracy. As translators are given a suitable period of time to translate and self-review a source file together with the help of editors, proofreaders, and dictionaries. The level of accuracy is significantly high. In some cases, the translation should be perfect and ready to publish. Meanwhile, interpreters are not required to translate exactly every word in the speech. They can paraphrase the word as long as the core meaning remains. Of course, to guarantee the accuracy of the translated speech, interpreters should prepare well before the conference or meeting. The third is one-way and two-way translation. As mentioned before, a qualified translator should be a native of the target language. For example, when translating documents from English to Japanese, native Japanese translators should text the text. But there's no vice versa. If it's a Japanese to English project, you shouldn't assign it to a native Japanese linguist. In contrast to way, translation is a must for interpreters. Interpreters are expected to translate back and forth in at least two languages. An interpreter for a Korea-Vietnam hospital, say, is able to translate from Korean to Vietnamese, so that the patients can understand the doctor's advice or diagnosis. At the same time, he or she is required to translate the patient's condition and feedback from Vietnamese to Korean to the doctors. From the explanation above, it can be concluded that the different translators and interpreters are: the first in skill required translators, 1. Great writing skills to produce smooth and error-free documents. 2. Sound research skills. 3. Computing skills and error tools. In interpreters, 1. Great listening and public speaking skills. 2. Quick diction making ability. 3. Deep self-knowledge and skills. The second, in accuracy level, translation with the help from dictionary, reference materials, and editors or proofreaders, the level of accuracy is expected to be almost perfect. In interpreters, do not require to translate exactly every word. They can paraphrase the word as long as core meanings remain. The third, in translation, when with translation, translators mostly translate a document from a source language to a target language, of which they are the native speakers. In interpreters, two-way translation, interpreters are expected to translate back and forth between two languages. They can be native speaker or have high proficiency in those languages. The key differences between interpretation and translation are found in each service medium and skill set. Interpreters translate spoken language orally, while translators translate the written word, but require deep cultural and linguistic understanding, expert knowledge of subject matter, and the ability to communicate clearly. Conclusion: both translators and interpreters work as an intermediary between two languages. Translators and interpreters convert words from a source language to a target language. In short, they bridge the language gap between people in two different countries and cultures.